The alert came in at 8:03 on a Sunday morning while I was still sitting on the edge of the bathtub in my hotel room, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold. It was a balance notification from my bank, the kind I had set up a year ago after a coworker told me she always knew when a large transaction hit her account. I looked at the number. Then I looked at it again. Then I set the coffee cup on the tile floor very carefully because my hands had started to shake and I did not want to spill it. $67,8. Gone. My name is Nora. I am 29 years old. I am a speech-language pathologist who has been working at the same pediatric clinic in Nashville for 4 years, taking on weekend evaluations, declining vacations I actually wanted, buying the generic version of things I'd rather not buy the generic version of, and putting every dollar I could move into a savings account I had labeled simply the number. $67,800 was the number. It was the down payment for a condo in East Nashville, a 2-bedroom on a tree-lined street with enough room for a home office and a proper couch. Not the futon I had been telling myself was temporary for 3 years. It was what I had when I woke up on Saturday morning. It was what I did not have on Sunday. I want to be clear about where I was when this happened, because the location matters. I was in New Orleans. I had flown in 3 days earlier for my brother Ryan's graduation from medical school. It was a big event. It was supposed to be. 6 years of his life, and a lot of people who loved him wanted to be there to mark it. My parents had been planning the celebration dinner for months, a private room at a restaurant in the Garden District, 42 guests, a menu my mother had personally negotiated with the chef, flowers she had ordered from a florist she found on a forum for event planners. I want to tell you this part carefully, because it's the part where people usually say, well, you should have known better. And I want you to understand something about the geography of a family before I explain what happened. My mother, Linda, is the kind of woman who is genuinely good at appearing reasonable. That is her skill, the one she has spent decades perfecting. She does not ask for things the way someone greedy asks. She asks the way someone overwhelmed asks. And there is always a crisis just large enough to make the request feel urgent, and just small enough to make saying no feel like an overreaction. My father, Frank, is quieter. He fills the space my mother leaves open. He is the kind of man who shows up at the end of a conversation already holding the thing he was working toward the whole time. Growing up, I was the one who kept track of things. My younger sister, Megan, was more flexible. She went along with plans. She said yes first and sorted through the implications later. I was the one who read the fine print, who asked the second question, who stayed on the phone with the insurance company until I got a straight answer. My family called this being difficult. I called it being thorough. We never fully resolved the disagreement. When I started making real money, things shifted in the way I had anticipated and dreaded in equal measure. The requests started small. A loan for a car repair that was never repaid, help with a medical bill, a birthday gift that cost 4 times what either of my parents had ever spent on me. I gave because I loved them, and because the guilt of not giving was heavier than the cost, at least at first. By the time I was 26, I had started saying no, calmly, consistently, with a smile that I hoped communicated warmth without opening a door. The asks slowed. I thought we had arrived at a new arrangement. I should have known that arrangements with my family were never final. They were just pauses. On Thursday evening, the night after Ryan's graduation ceremony, my mother came to my hotel room while I was changing for the dinner. She had a glass of wine in one hand and the look on her face that I recognized as the precursor to a practical question. She told me that one of the vendor payments for the evening had become complicated. The restaurant had a new billing system, she said, and they were requiring a direct bank transfer rather than a credit card for the final balance on the private room. Her own card, she said, had been flagged for unusual activity because she had made so many purchases in New Orleans that week, the florist, the hotel block, small things that added up, and the bank's fraud detection kept declining the transaction. She said she needed access to my account for 48 hours, just to make the transfer go through, just until they got back home Monday and she could sort it out with her bank. I want to tell you what was happening in my body when she said this, because I think it matters. There was a sound in my chest, something low and familiar, like a door opening onto a room I had been careful to keep closed. I had heard a version of this request before. Not this specific version, but the architecture of it, the urgency, the reasonable explanation, the time limit, the implication that I was the only one available to help. I knew what that sound meant. I had learned to trust it. And then I looked at my mother, standing in my hotel room doorway, in the green dress she had bought for the occasion, holding her wine, and she looked tired, not performed tired, actually tired. The way someone looks when they have been managing logistics for months and something has gone sideways at the last moment. and it was Thursday. Ryan's dinner was in 2 hours. 42 people were already getting ready in rooms up and down the hallway. I said I needed a minute to think about it. She said, of course, take your time, and sat down on the edge of the chair near the window. I thought about it for approximately 4 minutes. Then I said, fine, 48 hours, and then she removes herself from the account. She said, of course, absolutely, thank you. She handed me my phone back after the verification step, and I watched her add herself. It took 6 minutes. That was Thursday evening. By Sunday morning, she had moved every dollar I owned. I sat in the hotel bathroom for a long time after the notification came in. I did not cry. I want to be honest about that, not because it reflects well on me, but because what I felt wasn't grief. It was recognition. The sound that had opened in my chest on Thursday evening had been trying to tell me something, and I had overridden it, and now I was sitting with the result. I did 3 things before I went downstairs. I called the bank and opened a fraud inquiry. The representative told me the transfer had been authorized through joint access and that a hold and investigation would take time. I said yes to everything. I wrote down the case number on the hotel notepad with the pen I found in the nightstand drawer. I called a lawyer, not anyone my parents knew. I found the name of a civil fraud attorney through the Tennessee Bar Association website, a man named Dennis, who had a Sunday emergency contact and a voicemail that said he called back within the hour. I left a message that was as concise and detailed as I could make it. Then I got dressed, and I went downstairs. My parents were having breakfast in the hotel restaurant with Ryan and my aunt. My mother looked up when I came in and smiled the way she always smiles. The wide one. The one that means she is pleased with how things are going. I sat down. I ordered eggs. I ate them. I waited until Ryan had excused himself to go back to his room to pack, and my aunt had gone to the lobby to deal with her car, and it was just the 3 of us at the table. I looked at my mother and I said, quietly, that I needed to talk about my account. She picked up her orange juice first. She did not flinch. She took a drink and set it down, and then she said she was going to explain everything. My father was the one who talked. He spoke in a low, measured voice, the kind he uses when he has already decided the conversation is not a negotiation. He said he had made some investments over the past 2 years in a franchise opportunity that had not worked out the way he anticipated. He said there were some partners involved, people who were expecting returns by the end of the month, and that things had reached a point where he needed to make them whole quickly before the situation escalated. He used the word escalated, the way people use it when they mean something specific and prefer not to say it directly. The money from my account was going to cover the most pressing of those obligations and buy them time to restructure the rest. I looked at him for a moment. You took my down payment, I said, to cover a business debt you never told me about. He said I was young. He said I was healthy. He said I had a good job, that I would earn it back, that he would pay it back, that he needed time, and he was asking me as his daughter to give him that. He never said he was sorry. He said he was under enormous pressure and that he hoped I could understand. Those are different things. I said I understood, and I picked up my bag and walked out of the restaurant. I sat in my rental car in the parking garage for 2 hours. I did not call anyone I was not required to call. I did not post anything. I made a list in the Notes app on my phone of every piece of documentation I would need. Account statements going back 12 months, the screenshots of the access request, the timestamp on the verification step, the transfer confirmation. I found a UPS store 4 blocks from the hotel and walked there and printed everything before I checked out. On the flight back to Nashville, I sat by the window and worked through the legal consultation notes Dennis had emailed me that morning. He had called back within 40 minutes. He had been thorough in a way that made me feel, for the first time since Sunday morning, like the ground was slightly more solid under me. His name was Dennis Harwell. He was early 50s, wore reading glasses that he kept losing on his own desk, and had a direct way of explaining things that I appreciated. He had handled civil fraud cases for 19 years. When I told him the situation, he listened for 10 minutes without interrupting, and then he asked me 12 questions in a row and wrote everything down. What I did not know at the time, and what emerged over the following 3 weeks as Dennis started pulling documents and making inquiries, was that my father's franchise situation was more than a bad investment. He had been raising money from a small informal group of people he had met through a local business network over the past 4 years. 6 individuals, including 2 family acquaintances and my mother's cousin, who had given him money under the understanding that they were buying into a retail development project that, it turned out, did not exist beyond a brochure and a registered LLC. The $67,800 from my account was not the first money he had moved to plug holes in this structure. It was the most recent. My mother's role Dennis told me carefully, was not the same as my father's, but it was not nothing. She had known enough. The access to my account had not been improvised desperation. It had been coordinated. Dennis filed the civil suit in the fourth week. The bank's fraud investigation supported our case on the grounds that the joint access had been obtained through material misrepresentation. My mother had told me the access was for a vendor payment. The actual transfer was to an unrelated account. That distinction mattered legally, and it mattered in ways I had not anticipated. The 4 months that followed were not easy, and I am not going to tell you they were. My mother called me 14 times in the first 3 weeks. I let all of them go to voicemail. Some of the messages were angry, the kind of angry that implies you are the problem. She said I was making things worse. She said I was humiliating the family. She said she had done everything she could for me my entire life, and this was how I repaid her, by treating her like a criminal. Some of the messages were sad and quiet, and those were the ones I listened to twice. Not because they changed anything, but because I needed to be honest with myself about what I was choosing. I was choosing it clearly, with full knowledge of what my mother sounded like when she was hurting. That mattered to me. I held it separately from everything else. My father did not call. He sent a text in the 5th week that said he hoped we could talk when things settled down. I did not respond. Ryan called me in the 2nd week. I answered because it was Ryan. He was quiet for a long time after I told him what had happened, and then he said he didn't know. I believed him. He said he was sorry, and it sounded like the real version of sorry, the one that doesn't ask for anything back. Megan called me in the 3rd week, and this is the part I need to tell you carefully. I had been nervous to answer. I was not sure what side she was on, or whether she knew something, or whether my mother had already gotten to her first. I answered anyway, because I had made a decision when this started to not build walls, where I did not have evidence for walls. She was quiet for a moment after I explained everything, not the quiet of someone processing, the quiet of someone deciding how much to say. Then she said, "Nora, I have to tell you something." She said that 6 months earlier, when she had been visiting our parents for Thanksgiving, our mother had come to her with nearly the same request. The same story, a payment, a card flagged for fraud activity, just temporary access, just for the weekend. I said, "Did you do it?" There was a pause. She said, "No." I said my phone was acting up and I'd sort it out in the morning, and by the next day she had stopped asking. I thought I was being paranoid. I thought I told myself she probably wasn't actually going to do anything. I didn't think she would really go through with it. She stopped. And then she said, "I should have called you, Nora. I am so sorry. I should have called you immediately." That was the moment I cried. Not when I saw the zero balance. Not when my father told me I was young and would earn it back. Not during any of the 3 months of legal proceedings that followed. When my little sister told me she had been asked the same question and had quietly, without drama, said no and had said nothing to me because she hadn't believed our mother would actually do it. That was when it broke open. I sat down on the kitchen floor of my apartment in Nashville and cried for about 15 minutes. Not because of the money. Because of how long this had been happening, in different forms, in different rooms, in ways none of us had talked to each other about. Because Megan and I had been carrying the same weight in separate silences, and that, somehow, was the loneliest part of all of it. She drove up to Nashville the following weekend. We got takeout and sat on the futon. I was still promising myself I would replace, and she told me things she remembered, conversations she had overheard between my parents about money, a folder she had found in my father's home office with names and dollar figures that hadn't made sense to her at the time, a comment my mother had made years ago about Nora always having more than she needed. She gave me everything she could remember, and I wrote it down and sent it to Dennis. It helped. The civil case settled 8 weeks before it was scheduled to go to trial. Dennis told me that my parents' attorney had advised them against litigation once the full scope of the documentation was assembled. The settlement required repayment of the $67,800 in full, plus my legal fees, on a structured timeline secured by a lien on my parents' property. There was also a separate matter that the district attorney's office had picked up based on the complaints filed by my father's other investors. I gave a deposition once. Dennis handled the rest. The last update I received was that my father had entered a plea agreement that included probation, mandatory restitution to all affected parties, and a financial restriction order. My mother received a civil judgment and a separate probation condition related to her role in the transfer. I did not attend any of the hearings. I had taken enough days away from work. The first installment of the repayment came in on a Wednesday morning in March, while I was eating breakfast before a 7:30 evaluation. The notification came in and I looked at it for a moment and then I kept eating because I had a 4-year-old who needed a fluency assessment and the eggs were going to get cold. The condo I had been planning to buy sold 2 months before I had the money fully back. I drove past it one afternoon after the listing came down. There was a welcome mat on the porch and a potted rosemary plant by the door. I sat in the car for a minute, then I drove home. I was less sad about it than I expected to be, and I thought about that for a while. What I had wanted, I think, was not that specific unit. What I had wanted was proof. Proof that I had built something mine that couldn't be undone in a hotel room, that no one could access with a verification code and a story about a flagged credit card. The address had just been the shape that proof took in my head. The place I found 3 months later had higher ceilings and a reading nook off the bedroom, and a kitchen with an east-facing window that got real morning light. I signed the paperwork on a Friday. I moved in on a Saturday in April with Megan and 2 friends from the clinic, and a rented van we packed and unpacked in one afternoon. My parents were not there. That was not an accident. That was a choice I made clearly and without guilt, which is different from making it without pain. People ask me sometimes because this is the kind of story that surfaces the way real things do. In conversation, in quiet moments, whether I feel like I went too far. Whether taking legal action against my own parents was a betrayal of something that mattered. I have thought about this honestly. Not the way you think about things you're afraid of, but the way you think about things you've already done and need to understand clearly. Here is what I know. My father built a structure over 4 years designed to take money from people who trusted him. When it began to collapse, he and my mother reached into my savings account, the one I had built over 3 years of early mornings and deferred pleasures, and they transferred it to cover his exposure. This required planning. It required my mother to come to my hotel room with a glass of wine and a story about a flagged credit card. It required her to sit across from me at a breakfast table and wait while I called the bank and then watch me drive away. These were not accidents. They were decisions made with the specific understanding that I would either not find out in time or would not have the resources to do anything about it. I love my parents. I want to say that plainly because it is true and because I think it honors how hard this actually was. I love them the way you love something you have had to grieve before it is fully gone. But loving someone does not mean absorbing the damage they cause and calling it family loyalty. And protecting yourself legally, financially, clearly is not the same as refusing to love them. These things can be true at the same time. I needed a year to stop feeling like I had to choose. Megan came for the holidays. She brought a cutting board she had made from reclaimed wood because she knew I needed a real one and because she's the kind of person who pays attention to what people actually need. We cooked dinner in the kitchen with the good morning light, and we talked about our parents the way you talk about something real. Not to fix it, not to explain it away, just to name it between 2 people who were both there and both made it through. We didn't resolve anything. We cleaned up and sat on the couch after, and she fell asleep before 10 o'clock, and I put a blanket over her and sat for a while in the quiet. I still take early shifts on Fridays, not because the overtime matters the way it used to, but because I like the clinic in the morning before the waiting room fills up. I like the part of my job where a child comes to me unable to say a word that matters to them, cannot call out for their parent or name what they want, and then 10 weeks later they can. I find something steady in that. It is work that builds on itself, week by week, in ways that are measurable and real, and no one can walk in on a Sunday morning and take it. I kept the notification, the one that came in at 8:03 on a Sunday in New Orleans. Not because I look at it, I don't, but because I think there is something important about not erasing the record of the things that happened to you, the same way you don't erase a scar. It is not a wound anymore. It is just information. It tells you what you came through, and more importantly, it tells you exactly what you are made of now. The reading nook has a lamp I bought on sale and a throw blanket that is maybe a little too large for the space. On Sunday mornings, I make coffee and sit in it with whatever I am reading, and the light comes in at an angle, and it is quiet in the particular way that belongs only to a space that is entirely yours. My neighbor asked me once, while we were both getting our mail, what I did for work. I told her. She said that must be so rewarding, helping kids find their voice. I thought about that for a moment. I told her it was, and then I told her I thought most people spent a long time looking for theirs too, just in different ways, at different ages, and usually under circumstances that were harder than they should have been. She said, that was a kind way to think about it. I think it is. I think it is also just true. If you are watching this and something in this story sounds familiar, the family that treats your stability like a communal fund, the guilt that arrives before the ask does, The moment you realize that the person standing in your doorway with a reasonable expression has been counting on you not to ask the second question. I want to say something to you directly. The alarm you felt and then talked yourself out of was real. You are not paranoid for hearing it. You are not cold for acting on it. And sitting in a rental car in a parking garage, making calm and methodical phone calls while the rest of your family finishes their breakfast is not cruelty. It is the most clear-eyed act of self-respect you will ever perform. You are allowed to protect what you built. You are allowed to love your family and still hold them legally accountable for what they took. You are allowed to build something new, a reading nook, a kitchen with good light, a door that no one can open with a verification code they obtained under false pretenses, and you are allowed to live in it without apology. If something here stayed with you, I want to know what it was. Leave it in the comments. I read all of them. And if someone you know is in the middle of a version of this right now, please share this with them. Sometimes the most useful thing is just knowing that someone else made it through.